And Jean? So you list a whole lot of institutions that I see as mediating institutions between government and civil society. So I want to take the conversation out to the broader culture. See if, Ryan, if you could speak on how these institutions are addressed by the decision, because Kennedy does speak about the wider culture. He has his one view, the dissent has another, and these institutions are caught in the middle. So what are your thoughts on the cultural question?
Sure. The cultural question is probably the most important question in the long run. And the central thesis of my new book, Truth Overruled, The Future of Marriage and Religious Freedom, is that the pro-marriage movement is in the same exact situation culturally that the pro-life movement found itself in 42 and a half years ago after Roe v. Wade. That the work that now needs to be done is in 3 steps, and it's the 3 steps that we've kind of divvied up between Carrie, Jean, and myself. The first step is correctly identifying this marriage ruling as judicial activism, just as the pro-life movement did on Roe. We've never accepted Roe v. Wade as the final word about abortion or about the Constitution. In fact, it told a lie about the unborn child, and it told a lie about our Constitution. And for 42 years, we've been bearing witness to that truth. The same thing culturally needs to happen with this Supreme Court ruling. The second point, which Jean spoke to, one of the first things that the pro-life movement did after Roe v. Wade was protect the rights of conscience for all American citizens to never have to pay for abortion or perform an abortion if it violated their beliefs. So in the same way, the pro-marriage movement will now need to protect our rights not to be coerced or discriminated against by the government into violating our belief that marriage is the union of a man and a woman. Step 2. Step 3 is the harder, more difficult, long-term program of bearing witness to the truth about marriage in a legal culture which has told a lie about marriage. Every year on January 22nd, hundreds of thousands of citizens come to the nation's capital for the March for Life to bear witness to the truth about the unborn. In thousands of crisis pregnancy centers across the United States, they've borne this witness. Feminists for Life, Silent No More, Women Speak for Themselves, Collegians for Life, Students for Life. The list of groups that have sprung up in the wake of the Roe v. Wade decision has been remarkable. There's been a concerted effort, cultural effort to bear witness. The question here is, what do we do on the marriage front? Because the reason that the government was in the marriage business in the first place is that marriage actually places a limit on the state. Marriage and civil society limit the government's proper domain. So the state has to recognize the truth about marriage. The state's not free to redefine what marriage is. In the same way that the state has to recognize the truth about our natural rights, including our natural right to life, the state's not free to redefine who has a natural right to life. So we have to kind of remind our fellow citizens of these basic fundamental truths, especially fundamental truths of political philosophy, which Justice Kennedy seems at every step to either ignore or obfuscate. Justice Kennedy, the driving part of his opinion is his philosophy of marriage. And as Carrie mentioned, that has no basis in the Constitution whatsoever, but it didn't come out of thin air. Justice Kennedy's philosophy of marriage is the natural result, the logical result of the past 50 years of the breakdown of the American family. It's the natural, logical conclusion of the sexual revolution. And so it's only a culture that's had the spike in non-marital childbearing, the explosion of no-fault divorce laws now in all 50 states, that fundamentally misunderstood the nature of the family and of human sexuality, that 50 years later would even contemplate legally redefining what marriage is, let alone having 5 unelected judges redefine marriage for the entire country. Let me quote a law professor at George Mason University, Helen Alvarez, who went through Kennedy's opinion and has collected all of the words that he used to describe what marriage is. She says, quote, "The Supreme Court rules instead that marriage is about adults, quote, defining and expressing their identity. Adults' desire for, quote, nobility, quote, fulfillment, quote, aspirations, quote, autonomy, quote, self-definition, the avoiding of, quote, loneliness, and desire for, quote, companionship and understanding." Nowhere in that opinion at all is there any discussion about a child's right to a relationship with both a mother and a father. The central defining feature of what got government in the marriage business in the first place, to make sure that men and women commit to each other permanently and exclusively as husband and wife so that children have a mom and a dad. Totally ignored in Kennedy's opinion, never seriously engaged any of the arguments that litigators like Jean were making. Jean was the attorney who represented both the state of Utah and the state of Idaho in their marriage cases, didn't engage the amicus briefs that people like me filed, didn't engage at all, just to say in one throwaway paragraph that it's a counterintuitive argument that redefining marriage would have consequences. Whether it's counterintuitive or not, it's true. And the best way to see this is to think what happened after we redefined marriage with no-fault divorce. Marriage had a presumption of being a permanent relationship, and under certain circumstances, you could file for divorce. In the common law tradition, they would classify them as the 3 A's: abuse, abandonment, and adultery. Serious reasons for saying a relationship that was supposed to be permanent was now being terminated. With no-fault divorce, you could file for divorce for any reason at all. In fact, for no reason. You didn't even have to cite grounds for the divorce, and we saw the divorce rate more than doubled, because ideas have consequences and bad ideas have bad consequences. So what happens now? Take Washington, D.C. The children who live in Georgetown are by and large born into married families and raised to adulthood by their married mothers and fathers. Children in Anacostia aren't as fortunate. They're by and large born to single mothers and have absent fathers. How do we as a culture rebuild a strong marriage culture, insisting that fathers are essential, when Anthony Kennedy has redefined marriage to say that fathers are optional? That's the cultural message that we now have to respond to. In the same way that Roe v. Wade told a lie about the unborn child, that it's a clump of cells, that a woman has a right to choose based upon a privacy right that somehow resulted in a right to choose the death of her child. In the same way, we now have to respond to a bad idea about what marriage is, as Carrie mentioned, what the right to procreation with respect to marriage entails. Is it a right for adults to have children, or is it a right for children to have moms and dads? What direction does this right work in? And so that's what I think the long-term consequence here is. I mean, I think we have to do, number one, call the decision what it is, judicial activism. Number two, protect our rights to live in accordance with the truth. But number three, we have to commit ourselves to a long-term program of rebuilding a truthful, strong marriage culture. And that won't be resolved in the next vote of Congress or in the next election. This will be a generational campaign. Not that the next vote in Congress or the next election doesn't matter. They do. But this is going to be something that our children and grandchildren will be responding to.